Thanks again, Amit, for joining us and taking out the time.
Thanks for calling me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So to Amit, to start off with, I'm really curious about your method and the preparation that goes into the show. In fact, Jude, who you know, our producer who's worked with you, when he joined Newslaundry, I would often bug him, tell me how Amit Varma really prepares for the podcast. Is there some hack that all of us can also learn? So just run us through, how do you pick like a subject or a guest? And what really happens between you picking a subject and recording the podcast?
Yeah, so I just follow my natural curiosities. One of my guiding principles for the show is that I don't really care about the news cycle. So just because something is in the news, I won't necessarily do it. My aim always is to not just reach across space in terms of, have people around the world listen to me, but also reach across time and create shows that you can listen to, say, 30 years later, and it'll still make a lot of sense then. So I aim for those kind of timeless episodes. So even when I do something that is in the news, I will, I'll let it marinate for a bit. I won't rush into it. Everybody's expecting I'll get hits, instant comments. I'll marinate a bit. I'll figure out the appropriate people to talk to, do my own research, kind of do all of that. And only then kind of really get into it. So I follow my own interest, but what it also does is that it forces me to broaden my interests, where I read more than I would. Whereas earlier I might, come across a book on a subject and say, sounds interesting. But now I'll say, sounds interesting. Could there be an episode in this? Which therefore forces me to pick up the book and read it. And as far as research is concerned, I've kind of moved towards, like in Jude's time back in the day, when I was with IVM a couple of years back, I used to do 90-minute episodes, 2-hour episodes. Now I ask them for 4 hours of their time. My episode with the great Abhinandan Sekhri was, I think, around 4 hours. I recorded an episode a couple of days back in my home studio, which was 5 hours, 15 minutes of talk time. So the idea is that you just settle back, chill out, really relax and get into it. A lot of that, of course, is also about knowing the guest and just having a conversation with them that goes over their life, their influences, where they grow up, all of that stuff. But also, whatever subject I'm doing, I need to sort of have sufficient background of it to be able to engage in a conversation and take it in different directions. And I find the show forces you to do that because, if you're doing a 5-minute interview, you don't even have to read the book. You can just ask standard cookie cutter questions. If you're doing a half an hour interview, maybe you read the book, but you don't have to do much else. You can read the author's bio on Wikipedia. If I do a 4-hour thing, I really want to kind of go deep. So when I did a couple of episodes on Gandhi with Ramchandra Guha when his book came out, and I read some 30 books on Gandhi for that. And of course, I'd read some of them before. I have natural interest in Gandhi. So I kind of reread those. But typically, I'll read not just a book, which might be the peg for the moment, but also everything else the author has written. And fortunately, I have a reading habit and I can read pretty fast. And and if you guys want, at some point, I can show you my note-taking system. I can share the screen and do that if you guys want.
In fact, I'll come to that. But Amit, so see, 30 books is a lot. And you do, I don't know if
that's a one time. I don't do it every time. But
So I know, I don't know if you've taken like breaks or if Seen and Unseen has ever been on breaks. But you do have, like right now, the show is weekly. So do you keep enough episodes in bank to sort of give you some buffer area to so that you are able to go through those research and go through those books?
Firstly, I don't read 30 books for every episode. Sometimes it's a couple of books. Sometimes there's no book. Like when I spoke to Abhinandan, there's no book, but there is, I'm going over a lot of interviews that he's done on YouTube, and I'm trying to get a sense of his life. And I'm just sitting back and thinking about all the stuff I want to ask him about, because there's a lot in common. There's a media, right? There's a media. We are pretty much the same age. He's a few months younger than me. So there is that shared experience of growing up in the 90s as India was changing in a particular way. So there are many interesting things to talk about. The whole journey itself is interesting, but a lot of it is not so much the hardcore research, but just the openness to sit back and listen and just get into someone's journey and not be obsessed with what is the structure, what do I talk about next. So that's part of it. And it's always been weekly. I think I missed a week at one point because of Diwali in one of the early years, but the show was very different then. But now I tend not to miss an episode. Now my modus operandi before COVID was I would go to a city, record a bunch of episodes. So I would have a bank. Like in 2020, in January, I went to Bangalore for a week, recorded 5 episodes. I went to Delhi for 2 weeks, recorded 10 episodes. So I had a bank. So even after COVID started, I didn't have to record remotely for a while. With COVID, I gradually actually got onto a week by week schedule. And part of it was just, what NY Times called languishing. I just couldn't, I didn't have the energy to just bank a lot of episodes and get a lot of work done. I was going week on week. But now that things are hopefully normalizing, there was some news of a variant in South Africa today. But now that things are hopefully getting back to normal, I'm starting to travel again. I was in Delhi last week, did 5 episodes in 5 days. In fact, I've recorded 7 in the last 13 days. And I'm recording 3 more in the next 10 days. So the idea now is to, like, by the time those 3 are over, I'll be banked till February. And the idea is to then give myself some space and kind of do other stuff. So yeah, so that's the plan, except that pre-COVID, when I was traveling, episodes would be like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Now they're all these 4-hour long deep dives, and which has really worked for me and my listeners. So that just requires a whole different mindset. Even if sometimes the research may not be that much more, it's still just talking for 5 hours with someone, and you have to be focused throughout, right? Being a host is tough. So what I'm doing now, just answering questions, is easy. You sit back, people ask, you answer. But what you're doing is much tougher, because you are having to figure out what is the structure, how much time has gone, what do I ask next, all of those things. So that saps away a little bit of energy, but it's incredibly rewarding.
Correct. With Abhinandan, I really hope you asked him about cricket, because one of his mantras about cricket is that it's a game and not a sport. But anyway,
you should have told me that before. I mean, but so no mention of cricket. But hey, how much can you cover in 4 hours? Yeah, just not enough time.
He really looks down upon cricket. He keeps saying it's a game and not a sport.
Next time, I will set him right.
Okay, so Amit, on the guest part, because your podcast episodes often end up stretching like 2, 3, 4 hours. So the guest or whoever is the interview, they really need to feel comfortable with you during the conversation. And I'm guessing a lot of people you speak with, they are people with who you've hung out before, you've known them from the past. But as the sort of podcast expands, I'm sure a lot of people you're interviewing, you're speaking to them the first time. So is there a conscious effort to make them feel comfortable? Because in, say, like a 3-year, 4-year time slot, they're also going through their life. They're also doing self-reflection. So what is it that you do as a host to like make them feel comfortable? Do you speak them prior to the podcast? Like, what is that process like?
I think one of the ways in which the show has evolved is that like early on, you're right. In my first year, you're bang on. It was a show about policy. I would speak to policy people I knew, and it was kind of those kind of circles. And the length was much, 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 much shorter. But as it kind of expanded, it took a life of its own. And now the show is known enough that most of the people I ask, I mean, I don't know most of the people I record with prior to recording with them, but they know of the show. They know what it requires. So they come prepared, which is really nice, because I'll ask them a question and then they'll just open up. So like every week, I feel so fortunate that people trust me enough to just sit back and open up with me. Now, what the long length gives me the privilege to try out, the opportunity to try out, is that I'm not short of time, right? So what I like to do, therefore, is I begin by talking about the guest herself. That, what was your journey? Where did you grow up? What was school like? And all of that. And when people talk about their childhood, there's a moment where they kind of relax. And they're just talking, and you can discover you both read Enid Blyton as a kid, or you can discover that, or you can laugh about, hey, people take the internet for granted. It used to take us weeks to put a mixtape together. And you find those commonalities. And once they trust you enough and they kind of, open up, that does a couple of things. Number one, that when you actually get to the themes you want to talk about, whether, like in Abhinandan's case, it was media and politics and all of that. But in a writer's case, it might be the book that he's just finished writing. But he's already opened up so much that he goes beyond the usual sound bites that he might have prepared for other interviews, and they just talk. And the most important aspect is for the listener. Because for the listener, like, let's say I'm doing an episode with someone who's written a book on Nehru. So you broadly know Nehru, and you broadly know, okay, interesting subject, ye hoga, wo hoga. But in the first hour, the guest is humanized before you. It is a real person. with real problems, real insecurities, real childhood. You might have read some of the stuff they've written, you relate or to the stuff they're talking about. And that humanizing is important because it then opens you up to everything that they say subsequently. So even if you don't agree, say, with a person's view on Nehru, you will not, like in our modern polarized discourse, nobody is human, right? Especially on Twitter and social media and all of that, we are quick to judgment. If someone disagrees with us, they are by default evil and must be abused. Whereas these kind of conversation, what it makes disagreements completely okay. You can like someone and disagree with them, as I often do on the show. So that's the other effect that it has of the kind of directions that I'm able to go in because of that.
Correct. And tell me this, like, how do you organize your research? Like, I'm like, of course, you read a lot, and a lot of those readings are specifically for a particular guest or a certain episode. So, do you have like do you have a method? How do you organize your research? Especially because this is something I struggle with, and because a lot of our reading these days happen online on Kindle, or you'll read an article. What I struggle with is like absorbing enough to remember it, say like a year later or even a month later. So is it something that you also struggle with, especially because a lot of it has to do directly with your work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a struggle, and it's a more of a struggle for me because I'm in my mid to late 40s, and the way past the way of getting past is what Tiago Forte calls building a second brain. That our brains are not really made to be information retention machines. Our brains are very impressionistic. Things come in, they get retained in all kinds of strange ways without rational connections, and so on. So Tiago Forte's concept is you use technology to build a second brain. A lot of elements to that, but what I do for my research is I use a note-taking app now called Rome Research. I've been using it for a year, and I find that to be a complete game changer in terms of just organizing information. And what I often do for my shows is that I don't do the research too much prior to the show. I try to do it as close to the recording as possible. So not only are all my notes in front of me, but all my thoughts about the book or about whatever I'm talking about are really fresh. So it might appear to listeners that, hey, Amit remembers everything. Yahan se quote nikal diya, yahan se wo kar diya. But actually, it's really recent. It's in front of me, and I would have forgotten it by next week. So that's kind of how it is. But I think what happens in life is that, look, all the knowledge around us, it gives us, like, I think about how we make sense of the world by connecting dots. Everything we read, all the knowledge we gather, they're all different dots. The more dots we have, the more high definition picture we'll have. Now, the thing is, we don't explicitly remember most of these dots, but just taking in this knowledge, imbibing it without realizing it, does make our picture of the world a little clearer over time, I would imagine, which is why I evangelize reading so much. I think it's so incredibly important. But even for people who don't have the time to read, because people often don't have the privilege that they can make free time in their lives. You've got work, you've got family, you've got all of that. What do you do? But one way of getting past that is listening to audio, because if you're commuting, working out, doing errands, you can listen to podcasts like the Newslaundry podcast and hopefully mine. And that's a completely legit way of getting knowledge. What is important is that you're thinking about the world, you're getting knowledge, and all of that is happening. So
correct. What was the name of the app again?
It's called Rome Research, ROAM Research. It's a paid app. It costs $15 a month. You want me to share my screen and show you? I can do that.
Yeah, sure. That would be great. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay. So this was for an episode I did with Rukmini S in December last year. And by the way, she's a fantastic data journalist and a fantastic journalist, period. And she's coming out with a book that I think releases December 6th. So what Rome Research does is it allows nested entries. For example, I start with the personal. So I have a little bit here. And, and I can just click and go deeper and deeper. So like, what is her background? I've written some things here and, stuff like that, but not so much here. A few questions here, questions on the political economy. But what is more important is she does this great podcast called The Moving Curve, which is a daily podcast where every day during COVID, she tackled a question about COVID. So I wanted to examine that. And so there are these sort of questions. Now, there were many big questions she tackled. So I can open this and I can see all the big questions that, okay, rights and privacy are 20 and 21, left-right binaries are 22 and 23. And if I want to dig further, in the context of like hydroxychloroquine is 65, missing deaths is 80. I got all that down pat. Every episode, for example, she would talk about, she would ask a question. And once you start writing them down, you realize a trend that initially they are simple questions like, why aren't we wearing masks? How are hospitals treating the virus? And later you go to deeper questions like, what will this mean for our disease landscape, for Dalits, for women? All of these kind of come into play.
The
and
questions are nesting within like topics.
They're all nesting within. And the other thing that Rome has is bidirectional linking. So, for example, here's a great quote from her. Poor people report more illness but less hospitalization, right? Very interesting. What if I want to save it? So what I then do is what Rome allows you to do is you can just there's this thing called quotes. Now this is hyperlinked. If I click on the quotes page, I have kind of all my quotes here, not just general quotes, but across subjects and kind of categories, and they're all kind of put together here, as you can see. So now let me click on, so I did an episode with Ghazala Wahab on Born a Muslim. And which is a fabulous book. And this is kind of the structure of a book, right? These are her chapters. But within each of that, I can take notes, like what is she talking about? And here I have like, I take the bullet point Agra Mohalla, but if I want the actual quote, there is a quote. I keep telling my writing students about how you should show and not tell. So at one point, she talks about her grandfather's love for the grandkid. She called her grandfather Abba. And typically, you'd say something like, if you're telling the reader, you'd say something like, our grandfather loved us a lot. But she chose to show and not tell. And it's a lovely sentence. During winter, he used to shell pine nuts during the day so he could reward us with fistful of shell nuts in the evening. Were really nice image and exact, much more revelatory. So this was, so within each chapter, there are all these points and I'm digging in, and laying it out like this allows me to see her structure. And for our conversation, I didn't want to follow her structure necessarily. I wanted the beginning to be all personal, and that's like 90 minutes of wonderful conversation. She really opened up. But after that, I wanted to go chronologically, while in the book, she doesn't. So I wanted to start with the story of Indian Islam, and then after these three, then come to Muslims in independent India and kind of get into all of those. Now, the advantage
you do have a broader skeleton.
But the advantage of this is, see, like earlier, I would have 30 pages of notes in Microsoft Word. And there, the problem is that if she mentions something that I have a note on, it's hard for me to find it. I'll be doing Control F and looking for it. I'll be scrolling up and down. But here at some point, say she mentions the status of women. So I can just click here, and if she's talking about double victimization, I can straight away go here, and here is her kind of quote on it, right? And so it kind of becomes much easier to find that way. So typically I'll have these multiple sections where there'll be a personal section, there'll be a book section, there'll be broader questions which come at the end. And that's kind of how it goes. So should I stop the share, or do you have questions about? I can stop the share.
My quick question. So let's just say, do you do like a similar exercise after you're done reading a book also, where you just like sort of put in your thoughts, or what could your take be?
I try to take notes during nonfiction, and I think it helps me retain the information. I don't do it during fiction. I just enjoy, I just read fiction to kind of enjoy, because there is a problem in this process also. So when I'm reading the book, every time I take a note, and I have, of course, taken like copious notes, right? I'm drilling in and in and in. Every time I take a note, I'm mentally shifting my attention from reading to taking the note, going back to reading. And it's sometimes a little irritating. Sometimes you just want to read. So at least for fiction, I don't do this. But for nonfiction, or I might be watching interesting lectures or videos or conversations on YouTube, if something strikes me, I'll kind of make a note like this. The other thing is, like, I created that quotes ka tag, which was hyperlink, but you don't always have to do that. I can literally put any word here and it will like I've typed liberal here. So everywhere where I mention liberal,
it's like a Wikipedia of your own thoughts and notes.
Yeah. And everything is linked to sort of everything else.
But so Amit, you've been seen and unseen. You've been doing this for more than 4 years now.
Almost 5. Yeah, start of 2017.
Correct. So I know there is an anthology coming, and a lot of people keep asking you also that when it will be out. So maybe you can answer that. But how do you see the legacy of Seen and Unseen? Is it more like a history record, or do you see it as an archive of your own intellectual journey? Like, let's just say, like, how would you want 10 years down the line, hopefully you're still doing the podcast, but how is it that you want the show to be seen in history?
Yeah, like I said, that's a good question. And like I said earlier, I want this to sort of not just be a show of the current time, but 30 years later, you can listen to something. Like you can listen to the episode with Abhinandan, for example, which comes out next Monday, December 6th. And I think an episode like that gives you a really good sense of the person that he is. Right. I mean, in his case, of course, he's very straightforward anyway. What you see is what you get. But with a lot of the guests, that's kind of the aim, that one, you try to capture the person and you get a sense of the person through the episode. And two, you also get a sense of sort of the way a certain issue was thought about at a particular point in time by the experts of the time, or a lot of deep background. Like, after 370 was abolished, I did an episode with Srinath Raghavan on that, on Kashmir, which went viral. After CAA happened, I did another episode with Srinath on that. And a lot of I've done a bunch of episodes on the Constitution with people like Madhav Khosla. So a lot of those sort of encapsulate a lot of rich historical material, which immediately give you a lot of background knowledge about a subject. But even though my tendency is to follow my own intellectual curiosity, I won't say it's a record only of my intellectual curiosity, because these curiosities are shared by so many of us, especially in these times where this is stuff that matters to me, and therefore it will matter to many other people. Why is our country the way it is? Why is our politics come to this? Why is our society so fractured in the way that it is today? What can be done about it? These are things that everybody cares about. Different people are thinking about it in different ways, and those thoughts are dispersed all over the place. So in my quest to kind of understand this a little better, I think it, so everybody is like a fellow traveler in that, and it's just interesting for that reason. So I hope that, it has that kind of timeless value to it. But more than what it will, like, so one of my friends, Shruti Rajgopalan, was starting her own podcast, and she had come to me for advice. And what I told her was, don't think of what people will think of your show on episode 1. Think of what people will binge on when they reach episode 100. So if they discover you when you've done your 100th episode, they should go mad with joy, because there are 99 other episodes to binge on. So that's one way of looking at it, that you're creating that sort of repository of knowledge and thinking and ideas and so on and so forth. But even apart from that, I think the attempt is that everyone who is following, and I won't just say my podcast, I'll say your podcast as well, other serious podcasts, other books, you want to create an ecosystem of thinkers who are thinking about the world, engaging with the world, and all of that. And whatever effects those might have are, kind of unseen. But I'd hope that I can kind of, be equivalent to a few pinpricks in that effort.
Correct. So Amit, I think one of the reasons why the show really sort of stands out is like how like the kind of connection you make with the interviewee or the guest. Like you really, by the time you're done with the podcast, you really know the person and their life journey. But do you think it will be fair to say that sometimes you also, because I think the idea is to make them feel comfortable if you're speaking to them like for 3 hours or 4 hours, do you think it will be fair to say that sometimes you also avoid issues or subjects that might make them comfortable? I know you've addressed this in the past, where I think someone had asked you that you're not contrarian enough, and you had said that's not your style, and so on and so forth. But if you just look at like two of the podcasts, and because I work in media, like the podcast with Barkha Dutt or Veer Sanghvi for that matter, didn't really touch upon the Niira tapes. Whereas if you're talking about their work, and if you're talking about journalism in general, like the past few decades, that subject does come up, especially with these two people. It comes up very often. So do you think it's a conscious decision, or you took a call that maybe this is not interesting enough in their life journey?
Yeah, good question. And I'll answer the specific aspect of it before going to the general aspect. So what happened with Veer was that when Radia happened, I got a very negative impression of him. And I generally had a slightly negative impression of him. And when the book came out, I was like, no, I don't really want to do this episode. That was my first thought. Then I read the book, and I was so charmed by the first half, because it was self-deprecatory, it was witty, it was funny, it hit a lot of right chords. But I was like, what about Radia? And then there's a chapter on Radia in the book. And I read the chapter on Radia, and I said, okay, this kind of explains it, and you can read the chapter for yourself and kind of see. And I said, okay, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt in this instance, that one, it's a combination that the tapes were tampered with, and the court ruled as much, though it took many years for it to do that. And also for the indiscretions that he did commit, which were not as serious as the tampered tapes make out, he did apologize. And he was very self-reflective about it. Now, my plan actually was to ask it in the episode, to ask it towards the end. But I think we reached 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever the length was, we reached the end of that. And like typically what will happen is, you saw the amount of copious notes that I have in an episode, right? I don't manage to cover everything. That was one of the things that didn't get covered, but I thought that was okay because his book addresses it pretty specifically, and I didn't need to go there. With Barkha, my real focus was not even on her entire journey, but really why I wanted to do the episode was to get a sense of how changing circumstances can change a person. Like, I think in certain ways she has changed in the last few years. She wasn't a friend of mine before this. Even now, we haven't really hung out or anything like that. So we're not friends. But there was a sense, and many people who've known her in the past and have worked with her and may not have liked her style said that she's changed. Adversity changes you. Things happen in these times. So my focus was so much there that the whole question of Radia simply didn't come up. And people don't realize, they think my episodes are long, I'm covering everything. They don't realize how much I don't manage to cover. So like, I didn't talk about cricket with Niku, for example. Now, as far as the other question is concerned, is number one, somebody asked, do you disagree with why don't you disagree with your guests? The truth is, I disagree in every single episode if you listen carefully. It's just that I'm not doing it in the Twitter style. It's not combative, it's not abusive, it's not aggressive. So people don't realize when I'm disagreeing. Like and also there, my aim is not to be constantly combative. My aim is not to look for gotcha moments. Ki, sir, aapne ye kaha tha 6 mahine pehle, aaj aapne ye kaha hai. There's no point to that. That's just a tamasha. That's a spectacle. And sometimes it is important to do that to keep public servants accountable. But that's not what I'm trying to do here. But I ask all the tough questions. Like, I had Arvind Subramanian on my show. I asked him about demonetization. I expressed my feelings about it being the largest assault on property rights in human history. I think demon was a crime on humanity. He was chief economic advisor at the time. I asked him about that. He gave an answer. I wasn't satisfied with the answer. I asked him another question. He answered that as well. And then I moved on. Right. So it's a 3-hour episode where we've spent 15 minutes on demon, but people have got it. The listeners, they've heard my point of view phrased through my questions, and they know what I think about it. They've heard his point of view. They can judge for themselves. There's no point harping on over the same thing again and again. So in that sense, it is not that I don't push back. I push back. I disagree a lot. I express my disagreement, but it's done really politely. And because they can see that it's coming from this position where I'm not trying to pass judgment on them and all of that, they are equally polite. They adjust to that kind of medium. And but there are, like, I remember I did one episode with Jaitheet Rao, who wrote a book on Indian conservatism, and I disagreed with a lot of the book, so we did an episode. And after the episode, he was super happy with the episode and really delighted with the way it went. His friend said that thank you for giving him a platform to, say what he has to say. And people who agree with me on the issues we discussed called me and said, ki Amit bhai, you demolished him. Aapne dikha diya. But the point was, that was not the point. The point was, I made it a space where both of us could say what we wanted to say, put our points of view forward, and let the listeners decide, right? And that is what the discourse should be like. Typically, what is the discourse on Twitter? People are not addressing an argument. They're not talking about ideas and policies. They're talking about people. They're getting personal. That, if Chitranshu doesn't agree with me about, my opinion, if he doesn't agree with my opinion on the film Dune, then he is a bad person. He is an evil person. I will quote tweet him, and I will be snarky, and I will shit on him, and I will take screenshots, and I will coordinate on WhatsApp with other people in my tribe, and I will make sure he's trolled to hell. That's Twitter for you. That's not my show. My show is, hey man, tell me why you disagree. Let's talk about Dune properly. That's my style.
So last question before I start taking in questions from our subscriber. As the sort of podcast grows further, I'm sure I don't know if you're looking at it this way. The podcast also becomes like a platform where the reach of the podcast is way bigger than the reach or the reach of the person who you're interviewing. So in that way, has it happened with you, or do you think you will be conscious as to who's the person who are you giving a platform? And I'm asking this not in something that's unique to you, but so for example, like Bill Maher shows, right? He gets a lot of flack because he would often call like speakers or politician that, let's just say, the liberal audience might not agree with. So do you think you will ever have like a filter as to who is allowed on the show and who is not allowed on the show? And so for example, just to put you on the spotlight, now let's just say someone like Kapil Mishra, for that matter, right? Like, we know that he stands for a certain ideology and certain style of politics and certain belief, which, let's just say, you don't agree with. So how far are you willing to engage in a conversation with that person? Where do you draw the line that, okay, just putting the person on the platform will make him reach more people?
Yeah, first of all, okay, couple of things there. First of all, if you put a person on a platform, people can make up their own minds. I don't really think that people aren't stupid. It's not, people aren't sheep. They're not going to believe what somebody says automatically just because that person has access to them. They'll think for themselves. So I have some respect for my listeners that way. Secondly, there are people I will never call on the show, but the reason for that is not some kind of social responsibility that, oh, I have a big platform, I don't want these people on my show. The reason for that is my own values. There are people who are so far beyond the pale that I will not have them on the show. I don't want to engage. And typically these are extremists on both the right and the left. So like a Kapil Mishra, I would not call him to the show. I would not call people like that. Now, the other angle here, and by the way, there are people I disagree with a lot who I have called on the show who've been amazing people. Like I had a great conversation with Kavita Krishnan. Now she's a communist, right? And I believe in free markets, and as strong disagreements as are possible in economics. But she's a remarkable woman. She's a very good human being. Her body of work is very powerful. People contain multitudes. You can't just say, I disagree with you on this, therefore you're a bad person. So I called her on the show. And for once I took a decision ki economics ke bare mein, I'm not expressing I'm not talking about economics. We'll talk about those disagreements some other day, but I want to talk about her journey and get to know her a little better. And I just feel it's a lovely episode because she also trusted me and opened out, and it was a great conversation. But there are what I find really repugnant in these modern times is the identity politics on both sides. Like I said, I think, to again invoke Whitman, people contain multitudes. And when you tie them down to a particular identity, whether you are, you're a Muslim love jihadi, or you are a cishet savarna, or whatever, whether it comes from the bhakts or the wokes, I think that kind of thinking is reductive. It ties you down to narratives of oppression or victimhood. I have a problem with that. I strongly believe in the primacy of the individual. Think of every person as a unique individual and give them the respect they deserve on that basis. So there are certain people whose politics is beyond the pale who I would not call on the show. And there are also other people I would not call on the show, not because I don't think I would have good conversations with them, but if, for example, they are in government, right? They are simply not going to open up and be honest. They will stick to the party line, and they will, stick to stick to the posturing. And I don't, and you can't have a great conversation that way. A great conversation at some level has to enter that zone of some kind of honesty where you're not at one point worried about what will people think if I say this, and second guess yourself and stick to a particular, script or narrative, but that you really open up and have a conversation. So that's definitely there. But yeah, I mean, there are, the Kapil Mishras of the world.
Yeah.
I would not sort of have them on the show, obviously.
Great. The next question is from Dr. Neha. In these times of the so-called 5-minute attention span, what made Amit believe that such a relaxed format would work?
I did not believe such a relaxed format would work. When I started 5 years ago, my impression, I didn't listen to podcasts then. So my impression was short attention span. You got to grab them in the first 15 seconds. I had one episode which was 11 minutes. I thought 20 minutes was optimal. Don't go beyond that. But then I realized three things. One, people who listen to podcasts, and it's a smartphone revolution that really made podcasts take off. And so the smartphone is key here. One, people who listen to podcasts listen to it when they are commuting, working out, or doing errands. These are your three main use cases. In each of these, there are a captive audience. So if I'm watching a video on YouTube, I can just do alt tab, click on another of the 800 tabs I'll have open, turn my head, talk to a friend, pick up a book, that's it, pick up my smartphone. But if I'm out jogging and I've chosen to listen to something, I'm a captive audience. Two, people typically listen at higher speeds. Like the brain can actually comprehend language at 500 words a minute. We speak, like my standard speaking speed is about 160 words a minute. So it's very easy to listen at higher speeds. I listen to everything at 2x or more. And if you haven't done that, you might think, oh, it'll be squeaky, I'll miss something. No, it isn't. Take it to 1.2, let that normalize, take it to 1.4, let it normalize, keep doing that till you've reached whatever is your final comfort zone. And you'll find you cannot listen at normal speed ever again. So it's really easy. And the third important factor is that people crave depth. Right. And the same people crave depth. It's not that some people are shallow, some people are deep. All of us have moments where we have short attention spans and moments where we want to sit down and engage and really find something out. And the rest of the media around you ignores this, for all kinds of incentives. The incentives of news television, for example, they give you shallow content. They are a mile wide and an inch deep. So if you want depth, where do you go? And podcasts give that, and people really appreciate that, right? So where they really, if like 370 gets abolished, they want to know the history of this damn 370. What are the different sides of the issue? How has it played out over the decades? They don't want shouty sound bites on television panel shows with 16 people on a screen. And nobody knows anything about the subject anyway. So there is this craving for depth. So as I realized this, and as the episode length went up, there's a massive correlation between length and popularity on my podcast, where my most popular episodes are really among the longest. Not because length alone makes a difference, but whenever I'm recording, one of the ways in which I calibrate when to end it is how interesting it is to me. So if I have gone on for a really long time, it is possible, it's because I was really enjoying the conversation, and therefore it's likely that the listener also will enjoy it. So I'd say that those misconceptions I had up until fairly recently, short attention span and those don't apply. People, don't underestimate the listeners out there, the people out there. Everyone is not a Republic TV viewer, or as Abhinandan would appreciate my saying this, everybody is not an Op India reader. There are people who want quality, who want depth. So, respect that, and, you will find they really appreciate you if you can give it to them.
Correct. Next up, we have Devna. Devna, do you want to go ahead?
Why did you change from Sunday to Monday, by the way? Why? Any reason? Because, dropping it on Sunday is a easier day work-wise. And, one could finish it within that. But, Monday is... why did it? Was it just logistics? Sorry if I'm like that.
I can't remember. I think logistics was part of it, but I can't exactly remember. But what early on, I was Monday when I started with IVM, and their research showed that Monday is the best day to do it, apparently. So everything they released was on Mondays at the time. And later on, when I went on my own, at one point I shifted to Sunday because I thought Sunday morning hoga, log sunenge, it's easier. I can't remember why I shifted back to Monday, but I had some reasons. But I figured if someone wants to listen on a Sunday, they can just wait.
Yeah. It's okay. Thanks so much.
You're most welcome.
Great. Next up, we have Samir. Samir, could you go ahead? Okay, I'll quickly ask Samir's question. He's asking, when is the anthology coming out?
Yeah, good question. This is completely my fault. I've kind of, during COVID, I've just become, people look from the outside, they see, oh, every week there is a podcast coming, writing courses happening, so productive. I've been incredibly unproductive. Large periods of the day are just me sitting in front of the laptop screen, either playing online chess or getting into YouTube rabbit holes while at the same time stressed ki ye karna hai. So basically, to cut a long story short, I had to go through I got a bunch of transcripts made. I had to go through them and curate the best bits and assign them into themes. And I haven't had the time because week on week, I was just doing the podcast. Now, in fact, one of the advantages of banking all the episodes, like I mentioned, I've done, is that by December 12th, I will have enough episodes that I don't need to record again till Feb. Though I do have an episode lined up on Jan 14th, but I don't actually need to record till Feb. And that gives me the luxury of then now sitting out and in a really directed manner, just getting this done. So that is really the plan for December, Jan, that just curate this and kind of get the anthology out. It's entirely my fault. My publishers are amazing and very supportive and don't harangue me about it at all. So it's me who is at fault here, and I will, make sure I get it done soon.
Okay. Next up, we have Daniel. Daniel, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hey, Chitranshu, I was just requesting if Jude could read out the answer. I hear his voice has many fans.
If Jude could read out the question, you mean?
The question, yeah, sorry. The question.
He can read out the answer also. I'm cool.
Jude, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. So go ahead.
Hey, Amit, tell us more about your brush with poker, chess, and what level you consider yourself really good. An expert, ? How do you divide time between hobbies and still accommodate all the reading you do?
So I've actually, if you want detailed answers to this, especially about poker, in episode 200 of my podcast, which is 5 hours long, I do speak about this because I was a special episode proctored by a friend, Shruti Rajgopal, and she basically got questions from about 30 of my guests, including like Ram Guha, Harsha Bhogle, and all of that. And they asked me questions and I answered. So I've spoken at length about poker. But broadly, the thing with chess is I was, in the late 80s, early 90s, I used to play chess at the junior level pretty seriously. But then I realized at about 18, 19 that I can't be an Anand. And at that time, if you can't be an Anand, there's no point because you can't make a living otherwise. There was nothing there. So I moved on and I stopped playing chess. So now I play a lot of online chess, but I play it just for recreation. I'm not serious about it, though I love playing the new variants that come out because they sort of equalize the field a bit. The previous theory doesn't matter, and you have to work out each game from first principles, which I really enjoy and which I think I'm good at. So I do a bit of that. With poker, I was a professional poker player for about 5 years between 2010 and 2015. I, in fact, wrote the first column on poker in a mainstream newspaper. I for about a year, I wrote a column on poker in the Economic Times. And it was called Range Rover. So if you just go to indiauncut.com and search for Range Rover, you'll find those. So I was pretty serious about it because, it is a game of skill. But at the same time, it's this unique kind of game, which is on the intersection of being a game of skill, a science, a sport, whatever, on one hand, and on the other hand, being pure gambling. And I have seen lives destroyed on the circuit by gambling addiction. And at some level, it just got really dark. And I was a winning player throughout, but I just felt that it felt a little bit murky. So I always imagined that the winners stay in the game, the losers eventually drop out. And when I left, I realized that counterintuitively, it is the losers who stay because they're addicted. They can't help themselves. They stay till they lose everything and more. And it's the winners who eventually leave after a point because they're winners because they are naturally, sharp people, smart people, and they're good at other things also, and they kind of move on. So that was kind of how it was. In terms of skill, it's really hard to say. I was profitable in the underground cash games I played in India. I did a little bit of the Asian circuit, a lot of Macau and, following the APPT and the APT where they went in Philippines and all that. So I did a bit of that in tournament play and in India, the underground cash games and so on. So, I was profitable. Now, good is, it's really hard to speak of absolutes. I retired in 2015. I've played a little bit recreationally and always kind of won at small stakes now. But if I was to get back into poker today, I don't think I'd be, as much near the top as I was earlier, because the game has moved on a tremendous amount, and I'd have to just really work very hard to get my level up there. And, and now the game theory is really advanced, and you just need to work a lot with solvers and simulators and just get a deep mathematical theoretical understanding of the game. And the thing with a game like poker is that ultimately there is, when you sort of watch it on TV or the way it's portrayed in popular media, you think that there's a space for individualism, that different people play in different ways and there's a role for style and all that. But actually it all comes down to the math, and there really isn't if you're playing properly. So that also diminishes some of the attraction of it for me. Yeah, that's
I'll quickly go through because we are almost running out of time and there are a lot of questions. So Amit, try if you can give like shorter answers also.
Got it.
Next up is Samir. Samir, do you want to go ahead? Okay, I'll quickly read out Samir's question. What topics, themes you think you haven't covered enough and would love to explore in the future?
I mean, I don't know, because if there was something I felt I hadn't covered, I would kind of be scheduling it right away. So I don't, offhand, I can't really think of anything specific. So I just keep going where my curiosities take me. And my hope is that, by next year, this time, I would have covered things and learned about things which I am not thinking of right now. So it's like an ongoing process. So nothing really comes to mind about things I'd really like to go into. But very briefly, one of the things I do avoid is I avoid foreign guests now. I've had foreign guests and names like Steven Pinker and Tyler Cowen and Matt Ridley on my show. But now I try to avoid them because they already have platforms. They already appear on all these great podcasts in the West, and their ideas won't necessarily be new to my listeners. So what I do try to focus on is get people on the show of whom a lot of my listeners may not have heard or may not know so much, and they may not have had access to so many platforms, and kind of try to do that, but all the while staying true to my intellectual curiosities. And here a final line, I know you asked me to be brief, but the final thing I'd say is that my show is limited by my knowledge and my interests. So it's not perfect. You can always look at my guest list and look at my subject list and say, ye bhi kar sakta tha, ye bhi kar sakta tha, which is absolutely true. And it's not that I'm passing value judgment on the subjects I don't take up. I'm just limited by my knowledge and my interests, and I just try to stay authentic to myself.
Great. Next up, we have Harsh. Harsh, are you there? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Great.
Hi. Hello, Amit. This has been a great interview so far. And your podcast has been really amazing throughout the whole lockdown situation. My question was that how should one try to listen to people on the opposite side of the political spectrum, given that social media already creates a bubble? And like, for example, sometimes when I listen to your podcast and I am slightly left of center and you are quite right, at least in the economic terms.
In economics, in
the economic terms. So sometimes I get very angry while listening to your podcast, and sometimes I just delete the podcast because I don't want to listen to it anymore. So like, I was trying to understand how I should go about trying to listen to the other side.
Yeah, I think, so Arnold Kling wrote this great book called The Three Languages of Politics. And his point there was that, and he looked at the three tribes in the US, which is the progressives, the libertarians, the conservatives. And he said they are often, like, discourse is so problematic there and so muddied because they're often talking past each other, because each of them come from different first principles, where progressives will look at equality, libertarians will look at freedom, conservatives will look at tradition. And from there, those first principles, a lot of what they say is coherent. But when they talk to each other, they are not keeping in mind what the other person's first principles and priorities are, and therefore they end up talking past each other. So I think one good way is to two good ways to sort of listen to opposing views better. And one would just be to sort of understand what their first principles are. And if they are coming from different starting premises from yours, of course, they will reach a different position. So kind of think about it like that. Be more understanding. Don't assume that they are bad people or they are bad thinkers or they are stupid because they've arrived at a position you don't agree with. That line of reasoning may be equally coherent. Also, try to, think of people as people and try to understand where they are coming from. If someone says something you don't agree with, like when I was much younger, my impression was that, if somebody is against individual freedom, they must be a bad person. But that's not necessarily the case. They come from different places, try and understand them better, and so on and so forth. And as for your being left of center and you get angry at my free market views, I just urge you one thing, that always when you think of policies and ideas, don't think of intentions, think of outcomes. Outcomes are the important thing. And if you think of outcomes, you will value freedom and individual rights as much as I do.
Hey, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. And I'd have to admit that it sort of feels strange to hear you speak so slow. But again, I would also like to thank you not only for the podcast, but for the show notes as well. The amount of information that's there in the show notes and the places it takes us to. Thank you so much for that. My specific question would be, that when was the last time that in your course of your podcast, talking to all these people, that you actually changed your mind about something about an idea that you held dear to your heart?
Oh, very often, very often. Like, and you can actually trace this, and regular listeners have. So the most sort of interesting way in which that happened was, I think, episode 115 of The Seen and the Unseen, something around that, was with Akar Patel on, he was writing a book then, which then came out earlier this year on Hindutva. And the episode is called The Intellectual Foundations of Hindutva. So I expressed to him something which Ram Guha had also mentioned in an essay earlier, for example, where he had said that there are no serious thinkers in India's right wing. And the way I personally put it was that there is no conservatism in India. Whatever intellectual packaging the right wing comes up with, it is really just a cover for their innate bigotry and misogyny. That was kind of my view. What I realized, and Akar also agreed, and that was Ram Guha's view in that famous Caravan essay. What I later realized over a period of time, talking with people who had, unlike us English-speaking liberals, who had, unlike us English-speaking elites, rather, what I realized talking to people who had grown up reading in Hindi was that there was a coherent worldview, and it was not a worldview I agreed with, but it was coherent. It had its own body of work, a system of thinking. So if you go back to my episodes with Suyash Rai, the episode I did with Rahul Varma much before this, even the fantastic episode I did with Akshay Mukul on his great book on the Gita Press, and you realize that there is a coherent strand of thinking. A lot of it is in the languages. A lot of it is people who are not translated to English, like Karpatri Maharaj and so on. And I disagree with a lot of them. I find a lot of those ideas repulsive, but it exists. It is not the case that it is not there. And as an English-speaking elite, speaking to all these people who grew up reading Hindi, grew up reading other languages, I think I developed a little more humility about the limits of my own understanding of this country, simply because English is my primary language and I hadn't just kind of read enough. So that both changed my mind on that one particular subject, and also over time I've just generally learned to be much more humble, because I do change my mind on many things. But here's the thing. I am not rigid, I believe, but I am rigid about the values I hold. So the things that I value are things like individual rights, freedom, the importance of consent, the immorality of coercion. Those are values I hold. I don't deviate from them. But as far as facts are concerned, if I have one view of history and you show me contrary facts, I'll change my mind very easily. That's not a problem. So really, so I'm not rigid when it comes to facts, but about my values, I'm pretty fixed. These are sort of my the sort of the guiding stars, the lode stars, whatever you call them.
Great. Then this is from Daniel. How do you get access to great guests you host on the show? Did you have a pitch? Did you have to pitch a lot in the initial days? Earlier, you weren't monetizing your content. How did the podcast business economics work out?
Yeah, two good questions. Earlier, I would just write to people and see what they said, and the format of the show was different. I think where we are now, the thing is, I think most people in India are kind of aware. They know what to expect. In many cases, they want to be on the show. They ask to be on the show. Publishers send me all their books. They want people on the show. Obviously, of the stuff that they sent, I'll maybe call, 5% or 10% of the people on my show eventually, but it's a good way of discovery as well, because I'm getting all the books that come out new. So reaching out to people really isn't a problem right now, and they've generally heard of the show. And also, just when I introduce the show, I talk about the past guests, and they can immediately just see the past guest list. And even if they've never heard the show or they don't listen to podcasts, they know that this guy is kosher and whatever. And I'm very upfront about what I'm doing, that these are long form conversations. We're going to talk for 4 hours. I'm very upfront about all of that. And so far, I'm kind of lucky to have reached the position where I don't have so much of a problem getting guests. If anything, it's choosing from the people who want to be on the show that often sort of becomes an issue. And what I will often do is I will have books lying on my shelves for months and months till I finally call someone on the show. So there's a long lag between my thinking that, hey, this person could be a guest, and actually getting down to inviting them.
Great. So last question, Amit. First is, how do you decide what should be edited out of an episode? I'm guessing if your episode is say like 4 hour long, maybe the recording is like 4.5, 5 hour long. So how do you take that decision? Like what should not be included in the podcast? And secondly, if Spotify was to come to you and say that let's make Seen and Unseen a Spotify exclusive podcast, how many millions will you ask them?
Yeah. So first of all, what do I edit out? Nothing. If you listen to a 4 hour episode, it was pretty much 4 hours. I like to keep the organic flow of the conversation. I think that is a charm. A lot of people will write in and say that, hey, Amit, I heard your latest episode and I felt I was in your living room and you guys were having a conversation in front of me. And I love that. And that feel comes because I cut nothing out. There's nothing produced about it in that sense. But I do give every guest the option to tell me if they said something that they won't cut out later. So if they said something they won't cut out later, like a couple of politicians have come on my show, Shashi Tharoor and Salman Soos, and JP Narayan's been on my show, Ashwin Mahesh has been on my show of UP. So if they want to something cut out later, I'll do it. That's a courtesy I offer to all guests, and really pretty much nobody has taken that up. So all the conversations you hear is pretty much what there was, and there's really nothing that I cut out. I don't believe in cuttings. I'll cut out the ums and the ahs, or if somebody stumbles, or if a guest says, hey, can you give me a minute? I'll just look up this data. So I'll cut that line out, right? But otherwise, I don't cut out any part of the actual conversation per se. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
If Spotify was to approach you and pitch you that let's make Seen Unseen a Spotify exclusive podcast, how many millions will you ask them?
So here's the thing. There was a point in time where after I broke with IVM, and there was a point in time where just the show was earning nothing. It was a mess. And I was pitching a lot of shows to Spotify and in fact to Audible, and they completely ignored me. The person at Audible who was there at that time had been hired from Z, and she said कि देखिए मैं तो podcast सुनती नहीं हूँ, मुझे Bollywood में interest है. And then she said आप interview आधा घंटे से ज़्यादा कैसे हो सकता है? And she had never heard of Joe Rogan. So I kind of say that like Spotify is Bandra or Audible is Bollywood. So two sort of different this thing. And I actually at that point told Spotify that if you want the Seen and the Unseen to be exclusive, I'm open to offers, and they didn't want it. So whatever. At this point in time, thankfully things have turned around so much and I'm doing so well that I don't think there is any figure for which I would make it exclusive to anybody, because it's like a labor of love. I want everybody to listen to it. If somebody doesn't have a particular app and they can't listen, I don't want that. So I am now very clear about this podcast that I am optimizing for reach. I want everybody to listen to it. Maybe there is some crazy amount at which I might start thinking about it, but I don't think that's remotely close to what anybody is going to offer me. So the Seen and the Unseen is off the table, and no platform has ever entertained my other ideas, including Hindi ideas, short form ideas. It's very bizarre to me that foreign companies come in with particular mindsets where either they think that India is all Bollywood and cricket and just get big celeb names and you work with them and that's it, and they don't really go deep into the ecosystem to see what people are actually listening to. Or they can sometimes be staffed by people from a particular set of foreign educated elites who don't get the pulse either, and go to some other kind of extreme, without specifying what is what. So today I'm at a stage where I've increasingly come to believe that for creators, platforms are irrelevant. That the last few months have been extremely eye-opening for me in terms of understanding that we do not need intermediaries. Creators don't need intermediaries and platforms to reach their audiences or to make money. They can go directly to their audiences and make money directly from their audiences. Because everybody who reads Newslaundry or the Seen and the Unseen is actually paying a price for reading Newslaundry or listening to the Seen and the Unseen, because they are spending time doing it. Time is money. They do it because they value Newslaundry, they value the Seen and the Unseen. And as both of us have discovered, they are happy to share some of that value with us directly. We don't need platforms. We don't need intermediaries. So luckily that brief phase where I was pitching stuff to all these people is like well in the past and will never recur. And I'm so happy that I could kind of figure this out, and that I live in these times where it is possible to be a creator, to be independent, and to be able to do these things and not have to sort of kowtow to gatekeepers.
Great. Thanks a lot, Amit. We're through with all the questions. Thanks for really taking out the time. I think there were a lot of questions by our subscribers. And maybe we can do this again later. We're planning a lot of offline events because newslaundry is completing 10 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Next year. So we are planning these subscriber meetups across India. So maybe I'll be in touch with you for that. Thanks for all the subscribers for tuning in. If Amit, you have any, what I'll do is I'll share the podcast recommendations with everyone in case someone has missed out. So yeah, thanks again. Thanks everyone.
Thank you for having me. This was great. And I'm happy to do this anytime you want. I really enjoyed this.